Movie came out in mid-1930s, a little bit before this movie. This crazy thing happened where all across America people were banning horror movies because they were really upset about them. Like Dracula and Frankenstein had come out, and the first wave of Universal horror movies had come out. And schools were really upset, and parents, because believe it or not, people were terrified of these movies, and they were like a bad influence on children and all these things. So there's like this big backlash towards the movies. So they kind of all went away for a while. And, all of the stars kind of had to figure out like what to do with themselves. So Boris Karloff unfortunately found himself being in mystery thrillers and doing a lot of Asian characters in yellowface. So he was kind of that was not a good time for him. So the less said about that, the better. And Bela Lugosi found himself, very much typecast as Dracula. So he was doing a lot of poverty row stuff and just trying to get work and trying to scrape by. Then what happened is that people started writing into Universal and requesting them, like, please bring back Dracula and Frankenstein. We remember seeing those movies 8 years ago, and they were so wonderful, we want to watch them again. So Universal was like, maybe we better, let's see what happens. And they put together a double feature of Dracula and Frankenstein and kind of toured it around the US, and it sold out around the block everywhere. Like, it was the biggest thing to happen in movies in so long. And so Universal was like, well, there's something here, like maybe it's time to bring these guys back. And so they decided to go back to the drawing board and make a sequel to their biggest franchise, which was Frankenstein. Now, you had Frankenstein, you had Bride of Frankenstein, both directed by James Whale. And those movies are incredible, without a doubt. There's nothing you can say to bring those movies down or anything bad about them. They're incredible movies. But what happens when James Whale is not interested in coming back to direct another Frankenstein movie? I mean, those are big shoes to fill. I mean, there's a lot riding on it. It's like really a lot of, I can't imagine the anxiety that were going through people's minds like trying to make this movie. But what you do is that you don't try to fill James Whale's shoes. You get shoes of your own, and you fill them with your own stuff. And that's what they did in Son of Frankenstein. And as a matter of fact, Son of Frankenstein, to me, is probably the most, altogether as one amazing gothic odyssey of everything you could ever possibly want out of a Universal horror movie. It all comes together with this movie. And I'm not sure if that was on purpose, but that's what happened with this movie. There's a lot of things coming together, I think, to make that happen. But there's two major arcs, I think, that really shoot this thing home for me. One is the emotional depth of the movie. And everybody that made this movie is totally committed and passionate and sincere. I think it's really easy for a lot of people to sit out there and laugh at these movies. Not in here. You guys are amazing audiences, and you always watch these movies in the respect and the way that they're meant to be seen, even when they're hilarious, which is great about you guys. It's what I appreciate so much about you. But it's really easy. These movies they're black and white, and the mannerisms of people on screen are very different than they are today. So it's easy to look at these and be like, look at that person, look at the hair that they have, look at the clothes that they have. And it's like, the great thing is that that's one of the things that it's so sincere, and there's so much work that's being put into it, and that's what makes it so great. But you have Boris Karloff returning as the Frankenstein monster in this movie, reprising his role. Now, Boris Karloff was 51 years old at the time of doing this movie. And he was, as Danny Glover would put in Lethal Weapon, way too old for this shit at this point. And he was feeling it, and he knew that he wanted to do this, and it was a big paycheck, and he was a very respectable man. I mean, he's very, very British, he's a very nice man, very generous. But he decided to do it one last time, to come back and do this. And it was almost a favor to Universal and the rest of the cast to come back, because if you have Karloff as the monster, instant hit, it's going to work. But he was pretty much really even-keeled, a good guy, didn't have a lot of problems. He was just a really great actor doing what he wanted to do. And then you have Bela Lugosi. And Lugosi at this time was struggling, as he would his entire career. His career was like a series of ebb and flows. It's very different than Karloff's. And I know that the reference point that a lot of people have for Bela Lugosi is the movie Ed Wood, which was directed by Tim Burton. And I'm glad no one clapped for that. This audience is incredible, because that movie is a pile of lies, and it's a bunch of bullshit, and it's a bunch of basically white people fantasy about what really happened, which didn't happen. And I think Bela Lugosi gets a lot of shit out there in the world. In fact, I see things that people just making fun of him and quoting lines like that fucker Karloff, from the Ed Wood movie. But the thing about Bela Lugosi that a lot of people don't know, especially at this point in his career, is that he started out in Hungary as an actor. But what was happening in Hungary at the time is that there was a big overthrow in government. Everyone was really upset. So Bela Lugosi became this revolutionary leader and actually led troops and stormed the government and freed his people. And this is all before he came to America to be Dracula. So he's this incredibly textured and very complicated man. And he struggled his whole career because he was typecast as Dracula, and he often called it a blessing and a curse. But he worked so hard at everything he did, and maybe he did get addicted to morphine later, and maybe he was quite a ladies' man, throughout his life. But that's a kind of like complicated superheroes almost that these people back in the day, like they made this mythology out of their lives that you just don't get anymore. And Lugosi worked so hard and cared so much about what he did, and he was so sincere. So you have both of these guys coming together at the height of their powers. And Lugosi in particular in this movie is it's absolutely one of his greatest performances. And you can see it all over the place. I mean, you look at his, the sympathy in his eyes, and you can hear the depth in his voice throughout, that he's really, really giving it his all, and he really cares about the character of Igor, which is kind of like ironic because you think about that now. It's like Frankenstein and Igor, these guys shouldn't have this much emotional depth, but they really do. And the heart of this movie, in fact, is the relationship between Karloff and Lugosi, and it's their friendship. This movie is actually, it's a horror movie first and foremost. You're going to see the Frankenstein monster rip people's arms off in this movie. That's happens. It's a horror movie. But really, at the core of it, it's really kind of a love story about these guys' friendship, that they would do anything for each other, and that's what it's about. And it's kind of amazing that they made this movie back then. So much depth in it. You would not expect that. There's also, though, this little kid in this movie who's kind of like a little rascal, but it feels like there's like a 70-year-old man trapped in his body. So when he comes out and says, "Well, hello!" like you're going to want to strangle this kid repeatedly over and over and over. That's the one thing about this movie. I mean, I think he's fine. I like the little rascals. They don't annoy me, but some of you, maybe a little harsh for some of you, so just a heads up about that. But on top of the emotional depth of this movie, it works hand in hand with a very, very sincere and really, it was kind of inherent, but it's also on purpose, like a visual beauty that they were going for in this movie. And Jack Otterson, who designed the sets for this movie, called it psychological sets. And there's this great quote from him in this book called Classics of the Horror Film, which is written by this guy, William K. Everson. If you guys don't know Everson, he was a film programmer and historian. He wrote a series of amazing books in the 70s covering all sorts of stuff. He did like the films of Laurel and Hardy, the films of W.C. Fields, classics of the horror film, classics of the detective film. And when you see them now, you think like, oh, they're just generic overviews, but it really is some of the most succinct and smart writing about movies at a time when, a lot of people didn't care. Like in 1970, his book came out, and he was looking at these movies seriously, and he took them seriously. But there's a little interview with Jack Otterson about the sets in this movie, and I think it says it best that he said, "At first glance, the sets resemble a castle interior, but the angles and masses were calculated to force an impression of a dreamlike location without intruding too strongly into the emotional consciousness." And what that basically means is that the sets in this movie are almost a character. They're so big and so overwhelming and so beautiful, and they almost engulf everyone in every single scene. And it's a true work of art, that what went into making this movie and how big and bold it is. And it's really a lot of expressionism in it, and there's a lot of shadows and lights, which happens in every movie. Shadows and lights are not a unique thing to this movie, but it's the way that they use them, and that it feels like the atmosphere and the mood and the creepiness almost becomes its own thing in this movie. And you don't get a lot of that in other Universal horror movies, mostly because of the length of this movie. And to some people, that's kind of a detractor. It's like, this movie is basically taking two Universal horror movies and putting them together. It's 95 minutes. So I want to give you guys a heads up about that, because it is long and there's a lot of talking in it. But the beautiful thing about that is it allows for something that didn't really happen a whole lot in the 1930s, which is development. And you get so much development between the characters if you listen to them, and if you see what they're saying, and you look at the gorgeous sets, and you let yourself get overwhelmed with the atmosphere of this movie. It really is very, very, very rewarding. So hopefully you guys can give it your full attention and take it like that, because that's how I've gotten the most pleasure out of watching it. And when I went to rewatch all the Universal horror movies, this one kind of struck with me the most. I think because of that emotional core and because of the beauty of the whole thing, and to see it on 35mm and to wonder at these sets that were all built by hand, all by people that cared so much and had so much love behind them. It's really a beautiful thing. So that's really cool. So this movie also, what happened is that I had mentioned before that horror movies were in a slump, but this movie kicked it all off again, and this was like the biggest movie in the world when it came out. And this really started the second wave of horror for Universal, starting with The Wolfman, and it basically launched Lon Chaney Jr.'s career and all sorts of other things before they really, really hit the skids in Universal in the late 40s, and then it was all over. But this is like the height of it for me. So I think that you guys, I'm very happy that you're here, and I'm happy that you get to see this on 35mm. So this is a great thing. It's a great thing. It makes me very happy, so thank you for that. So I don't know if you guys are here for the first time, you've been here a lot, but we have a very strict no talking policy here at the Draft House. So please don't talk during the movie, don't disrupt your neighbors, don't do anything, don't yell at the screen, don't yell at your waitstaff. Just be cool and be nice and eat your food and drink your drinks and be happy and enjoy this. You're here to have fun and be happy, so don't distract anyone. But if you do any of these things, you're going to get a warning. If you do it again, we'll kick you out of this theater without a refund. And believe you me, none of us want to do that. But if anything is bothering you, anyone's distracting you, please write it down on a piece of paper and put it in a little thing in front of you, and we'll come and look at it, and we'll take care of that for you. So please do that. Don't feel weird. Don't feel bad. We want you guys to have fun and enjoy it. I would like you guys to give a big round of applause for your waitstaff here at the Draft House. Like everyone that made this movie that we're going to watch tonight, they are a hardworking group of people that actually love what they're doing.